everybody. I'm very happy to be back again and making a video. I hope everybody's had a good weekend so far. I had a really busy week, so being home and not having to do anything and waking up really late has been definitely a treat for me. Also, I just got a really cool, adult coloring book called Dapper Animals. And, it's got, it's for foxes and owls and rabbits and all kinds of strange creatures that you can color in. So I've been very happily just sitting at home watching YouTube and coloring in animals. So being very nerdy and artistic. Anyway, I don't have a long introduction tonight. I think I'll just get right into the stories. Tonight we have two pretty long stories. One is the continuation of the last one, so it's going to be Tom Thumb's Adventures, so I'm interested to see that. And the second one is Black Giants. So, I'm getting into some stories that I've never heard of before. So, I'm really happy to hear. I'm very excited to hear what they'll be like. Please let me know in the comments or by messages if there's any stories that you want to hear, if you have any suggestions, what you like, what you don't like, just anything at all. At the end of the day, I want this to be something that you guys enjoy, something that helps you sleep and relax and, drift off to bed, to have sweet dreams. So, just let me know. I really want to hear from you guys. Anywho, so I have my big book in here. Tom Thumb's Travels. Once upon a time, there was once a tailor who had a son no higher than a thumb, so he called him Tom Thumb. Notwithstanding his small size, he had plenty of spirit, and one day he said to his father, "Father, go out into the world, I must, and will." "Very well, my son," said the old man, and taking a long darning needle, he put a knob of sealing wax on the end, saying, "Here is a sword for you to take with you on your journey." Now the little tailor wanted to have one more meal first, and so he trotted into the kitchen to see what sort of farewell feast his mother had cooked for him. It was all ready, and the dish was standing on the hearth. Then said he, "Mother, what is the fare today?" "You can see for yourself," said the mother. Then Tom Thumb ran to the hearth and peeped into the dish, but as he stretched his neck too far over it, the steam caught him and carried him up the chimney. For a time he floated about with the steam in the air, but at last he sank down to the ground. Then the little tailor found himself out in the wide world, and he was wandered about, and finally engaged himself to a master tailor. But the food was not good enough for him. "Mistress," said Tom Thumb, "if you do not give us better victuals, I shall go out early in the morning and write with a piece of chalk house door. Plenty of potatoes to eat, but little meat. So goodbye, Mr. Potato." "What are you after, Grasshopper?" said the mistress, and growing angry she seized a piece of rag to beat him off. But he crept underneath her thimble, and then peeped at her and put his tongue out at her. She took up the thimble and would have seized him, but he hopped among the rags, and as the mistress turned them over to find him, he stepped into a crack in the table. "Hee, mistress!" cried he, sticking out his hand, and when she was just about to grasp him, he jumped up into the table drawer, but in the end she caught him and drove him out of the house. So he wandered on until he came to a great wood, and there he met a gang of robbers that were going to rob the king's treasury. When they saw the little tailor, they thought to themselves, "Such a little fellow might easily creep through a keyhole and serve instead of a picklock." "Hullo!" cried one. "You giant Goliath, will you come with us to the treasure chamber? You can slip in and then throw us out the money." Tom Thumb considered a little, but at last he consented and went with them to the treasure chamber. Then he looked all over the door, above and below, but there was no crack to be seen. At last he found one broad enough to let him pass, and he was getting through when one of the sentinels that stood before the door saw him, and said to the other, "See what an ugly spider is crawling there. I will put an end to him." "Let the poor creature alone," said the other. "He has done no harm." So Tom Thumb got safely through the crack into the treasure chamber, and he opened the window beneath which the thieves were standing, and he threw them out $1 after another. Just as he had settled to work, he heard the king coming to take a look at his treasure, and so Tom Thumb had to creep away. The king presently remarked that many good dollars were wanting, but could not imagine how they could have been stolen, as the locks and bolts were in good order, and everything seemed secure. As he went away, saying to the two sentinels, "Keep good guard, there's someone after the money." When Tom Thumb had set the work anew, they heard the click, click of money, and hastily rushed in to catch the thief. But the little tailor, as he heard them coming, was too quick for them, and hiding in the corner, he covered himself in $1, so that nothing of him was to be seen. And then he mocked the sentinels, crying, "Here I am!" They ran about, and when they came near him, he was soon in another corner, under $1, crying, "Here I am!" Then the sentinels ran towards him, and in a moment he was in a third corner, crying, "Here I am!" In this way he made fools of them, and dodged them so long about the treasure chamber that they got tired and went away. Then he went to work and threw the dollars out of the window, one after the other, till they were all gone, and when it came to the last, as he flung it with all his might, he jumped nimbly on it and flew with it out the window. The robbers gave him great praise, saying, "You are a most valiant hero. Will you be our captain?" But Tom Thumb thanked them, and said he would like to see the world first. Then they divided the spoils, but the little tailor's share was only 1 farthing, which was all he was able to carry. Then, binding his sword to his side, he bid the robbers good day, and started on his way. He applied to several master tailors, but they would not have anything to do with him, and at last he hired himself an indoor servant at an inn. The maid servants took a great dislike for him, for he used to see everything they did without being seen by them, and he told the master and mistresses about what they took from the plate and what they carried away out of the cellar, and they said, "What a little! We will pay you out," and took counsel together to play him some mischievous trick. Once, when one of the maids was mowing the grass in the garden, they saw Tom Thumb jumping about and creeping among the cabbages, and she mowed him with the grass, tied all together in a bundle, and threw it to the cows. Among the cows was a big black one, who swallowed him down without doing him any harm, but he did not like this lodging. It was dark, and there was no candle to be had. When the cow was being milked, he cried out, "Strip, strap, stroll, will the pail soon be full?" But he was not understood because of the noise of the milk. Presently the landlord came into the stable and said, "Tomorrow this cow is to be slaughtered." At that Tom Thumb felt very terrified, and with a shrill voice he cried, "Let me out first, I'm sitting inside here." The master heard him quite plainly, but could not tell where the voice came from. "Where are you?" he asked. "Inside the black one," answered Tom Thumb. But the master, not understanding the meaning of it, went away. The next morning the cow was slaughtered. Happily in all the cutting and slashing he escaped all harm, and he slept among the sausage meat. When the butcher came near to see the work, he cried with all his might, "Don't cut so deep, don't cut so deep, I am underneath." But for the sound of the butcher's knife his voice was not heard. Now poor Tom Thumb was in great straits, and he had to jump nimbly out of the way of the knife, and finally he came through with a whole skin. But he could not get quite away, and he had to let himself remain with the lumps of fat to be put in a black pudding. His quarters were rather narrow, and he had to be hung up in the chimney in the smoke, and to remain there a very long while. At last, when winter came, he was taken down, for the black pudding was to be set before a guest. And when the landlady cut the black pudding in slices, he had to great care not to lift up his head too much, or it might be shaved off at the neck. At last he saw his opportunity, took courage, and jumped out. But as things had gone so badly with him in that house, Tom Thumb did not mean to stay there, but betook himself again to his wanderings. His freedom, however, did not last long. In the open fields there came a fox, who snapped him up without thinking. "Oh, Mr. Fox," cried Tom Thumb, "here I am sticking in your throat. Let me out again." "Very well," answered the fox. "It is true you are no better than nothing. Promise me the hens in your father's yard, and I will let you go." "With all my heart," answered Tom Thumb. "You shall have them all, I promise you." Then the fox let him go, and he ran home. When the father saw his dear son again, he gave the fox willingly all the hens that he had. "And look, besides, what a fine piece of money I've got for you," said Tom Thumb, and handed over the farthing which he had earned in his wanderings. "But how, you ask, did they let the fox devour all the poor chicks?" "Why, you silly child, you know that your father would rather have you than the hens in his yard." The end. Man, Tom Thumb really gets in some serious trouble. I really wonder if he's going to have more stories in this book. It's a big book, so maybe. We'll see. I'm kind of running out of breath today. It's weird. Anyhow. Next for tonight, my little kitten, it is The Young Giant. Once upon a time, a long time ago, a countryman had a son who was as big as a thumb, and did not become any bigger, and during several years did not grow any hair's breadth. Once, when the father was going out to plow, the little one said, "Father, I will go out with thee." "Thou wouldst go out with me," said the father. "Stay here, thou wilt be of no use out there, besides thou mightst get lost." Then Thumbling began to cry, and for the sake of peace his father put him in his pocket, and took him with him. When he was outside in the field, he took him out again, and set him in freshly cut farrow. While he was there, a great giant came over the hill. "Dost thou see the great monster?" said the father, for he wanted to frighten the little fellow to make him good. "He is coming to fetch thee." The giant, however, had scarcely taken 2 steps with his long legs before he was in the furrow. He took little Thumbling carefully with 2 fingers, examined him, and without saying one word went away with him. His father stood by, but could not utter a sound for terror, and he thought nothing else but that his child was lost, and that as long as he lived he should never set eyes on him again. The giant, however, carried him home, suckled him, and Thumbling grew and became tall and strong after the manner of giants. When 2 years had passed, the old giant took him into the forest, wanted to try him, and said, "Pull out a stick for thyself." When the boy was already so strong that he tore up a young tree out of the earth by the roots. But the giant thought, "We must do better than that," took him back again, and suckled him 2 years later. 2 years longer. When he tried him, his strength had increased so much that he could tear an old tree out of the ground. That was still not enough for the giant. He again suckled him for 2 years, and when he then went with him into the forest and said, "Now just tear up a proper stick for me," the boy tore up the strongest oak tree from the earth, so that it was split, and that was a mere trifle for him. "Now that will do," said the giant. "Thou art perfect," and took him back to the fields from whence he had brought him. His father was there following the plough. The young giant went up to him and said, "Does my father see what a fine man his son has grown into?" The farmer was alarmed, and said, "No, thou art not my son. I don't want thee. Leave me." "Truly I am your son. Allow me to do your work. I can plough as well as you, nay, better." "No, no, thou art not my son, and thou canst not plough. Go away." However, as he was frightened of this great man, he left hold of the plough, stepped back, and stood at one side of the piece of land. Then the youth took the plough and just pressed it with one hand, but his grasp was so strong that the plough went deep into the earth. The farmer could not bear to see that, and called to him, "If thou art determined to plough, thou must not press so hard on it. That makes bad work." The youth, however, unharnessed the horses and drew the plough himself, saying, "Just go home, father, and bid my mother make ready a large dish of food, and in the meantime I will go over the field." Then the farmer went home and ordered his wife to prepare the food. But the young ploughed the fields, which was 2 acres large, quite alone, and then he harnessed himself to the harrow, and harrowed the whole of the land, using 2 harrows at once. When he had done it, he went into the forest and pulled up 2 oak trees, laid them across his shoulder, and hung 1 harrow on them behind and 1 before, and also 1 horse behind and 1 before, and carried all as if it had been a bundle of straw to his parents' house. When he entered the yard, his mother did not recognize him, and asked, "Who is that horribly tall man?" The farmer said, "That is our son." She said, "No, that cannot be our son. We never had such a tall one. Ours was a little thing," she called to him. "Go away, we do not want thee." The youth was silent, but led his horse to the stable, gave them oats and hay and all they wanted. When he had done this, he went into the parlor, sat down on the bench, and said, "Mother, now I should like something to eat. Will it be ready soon?" Then she said, "Yes," and brought it into immense dishes full of food, which would have been enough to satisfy herself and her husband for a week. The youth, however, ate the whole of it himself, and asked if she had nothing more to set before him. "No," she replied, "that is all we have. But that was only a taste. I must have more." She did not dare to oppose him, and went and put a huge cauldron full of food on the fire, and when it was ready, carried it in. At length, "Come a few crumbles," said he, and ate all there was, but it was still not sufficient to appease his hunger. Then said he, "Father, I see well that with thee I shall never have food enough. If thou will get me an iron staff which is strong, and which I cannot break with my knees, I will go out into the woods." The farmer was glad, put his 2 horses in his cart, and fetched from the smith a staff so large and thick that the 2 horses could only just bring it in. The youth laid it across his knees, and snap! He broke it in 2 in the middle like a beanstalk, and threw it away. The father then harnessed 4 horses, and brought a bar which was so long and thick that the 4 horses could only just drag it. The son snapped this also in twain against his knee, threw it away, and said, "Father, this can be of no use to me. Thou must harness more horses and bring a stronger staff." So the father harnessed 8 horses, and brought one which was so long and thick that the 8 horses could only just carry it. When the son took it in his hand, he broke a bit from the top top of it also, and said, "Father, I see that thou wilt not be able to procure me any such staff as I want. I will remain no longer with thee." So he went away, and gave out that he was a smith's apprentice. He arrived at a village wherein lived a smith who was a greedy fellow, who never did a kindness to anyone, but wanted everything for himself. The youth went into the smithy to him, and asked if he needed a journeyman. "Yes," said the smith, and took it, and looked at him, and thought, "That is a strong fellow, who will strike out well and earn his bread." So he asked, "How much wages dost thou want?" "I don't want any at all," he replied. "Only every fortnight, when the other journeymen are paid, I will give thee 2 blows, and thou must bear them." The miser was heartily satisfied, and thought he would thus save much money. Next morning the strange journeyman was to bring work, but when the master brought the glowing bar, and the youth struck his first blow, the iron flew asunder, and the anvil sank so deep into the earth that there was no bringing it back again. Then the minster grew angry, and said, "Oh, but you can't make any use of thee. Thou strikest far too powerfully. What wilt thou have for 1 blow?" Then said he, "I will only give thee quite a small blow, that's all." And he raised his foot and gave him such a kick that he flew away over 4 loads of hay. Then he sought out the thickest iron bar in the smithy for himself, took it as a stick in his hand, and went onwards. When he had walked for some time, he came to a small farm, and asked the bailiff if he did not require a head servant. Yes, said the bailiff, "I can make use of one. You look a strong fellow who can do something. How much a year do you want as wages?" He again replied that he wanted no wages at all, but that every year he would give him 3 blows, which he would bear. Then the bailiff was satisfied, for he too was a covetous fellow. Next morning all the servants were to get into the wood, and the others were already up, but the head servant was still in bed. Then one of them called to him, "Get up, it is time. We are going into the woods, and thou must go with us." "Ah," said he, quietly, roughly, and surlily, "you must go then. I shall be back again before any of you." Then the others went to the bailiff, and told him that the head man was still lying in bed, and would not go into the woods with them. The bailiff said they were to wake him again, and tell him to harness the horses. The head man, however, said as before, "Just go there, I shall be back again before any of you." And then he stayed in bed 2 hours longer. At length he arose from the feathers, but first he got himself 2 bushels of peas from the loft, made himself some broth with them, ate it at his leisure, and when that was done, went and harnessed the horses and drove into the woods. Not far from the wood was a ravine through which he had to pass, so he first drove the horses on, then stopped them, and went behind the cart, took trees and brushwood, and a great barricade so that no horse could get through. When he was entering the woods, the others were just driving out of it, with their loaded carts to go home. Then said he to them, "Drive on, I will still get home before you do." He did not drive far into the woods, but at once tore 2 of the very largest trees of all in the earth, threw them on his cart, and turned around. When he came to the barricade, the others were still standing there, not able to get through. "Don't you see," said he, "that if you had stayed with me, you would have got home just as quickly, and would have had another hour's sleep?" He now wanted to drive on, but his horses could not work their way through, so he unharnessed them, laid them on top of the cart, took the shafts in his own hands, and drew it over. Then he did this just as easily as if he had laden with feathers. When he was over, he said to the others, "There, you see, I have got over quicker than you," and drove on, and the others had to stay where they were. In the yard, however, he took a tree in his hands, showed it to the bailiff, and said, "Isn't that a fine bundle of wood?" Then said the bailiff to his wife, "The servant is a good one. If he does sleep long, he is still home before the others." So he served the bailiff a year, and when that was over, the other servants were getting their wages. He said it was time for him to have his too. The bailiff, however, was afraid of the blows which he was to receive, and earnestly entreated him to excuse him from having them, for rather than that he himself would be head servant, and the youth should be bailiff. "No," said he, "I will not be a bailiff. I am head servant. I will remain so, but I will administer that which we agreed on." The bailiff was willing to give him whatever he demanded, but it was of no use. The head servant said no to everything. Then the bailiff did not know what to do, and begged for a fortnight's delay, for he wanted to find some way to escape. The head servant consented to this delay. The bailiff summoned all his clerks together, and they were to think the matter over, and give him advice. The clerks pondered for a long time, but at last they said that no one was sure of his life with the head servant, for he could kill a man as easily as a midge, and that the bailiff ought to make him get into the well and clean up, and when he was down below they would roll up one of the millstones which was lying there, and throw it on his head, and then he would never return to daylight. The advice pleased the bailiff, and the head servant was quite willing to go down the hole. Well, when he was standing down below at the bottom, they rolled down the largest millstone, and thought they had broken his skull, but he cried, "Chase away those hens from the well, they are scratching in the sand up there, and throwing the grains into my eyes, so that I can't see." So the bailiffs cried, "Shh, shh," and pretended to frighten the hens away. When the head servant had finished his work, he climbed up and said, "Just look what a beautiful necktie I have on," and behold, it was the millstone which he was wearing around his neck. The head servant now wanted to take his reward, but the bailiff again begged for a fortnight's delay. The clerks met together and advised him to send the head servant to the haunted mill to grind corn by night, for from thence as yet no man had ever returned in the morning alive. The proposal pleased the bailiff. He called the head servant that very evening, and ordered him to take 8 bushels of corn to the mill and grind it that night, for it was wanted. So the head servant went to the loft and put 2 bushels in the right pocket and 2 in the left, and took 4 in a wallet, half in his back and half on his breast, and thus laden went the haunted mill. The miller told him that he would grind there very well by day, but not by night, for the mill was haunted, and that up to the present time whoever had gone into it at night had been found in the morning lying dead inside. He said, "I will manage it, just go away to bed." Then he went into the mill and poured out the corn. About 11 o'clock he went into the miller's room and sat down on the bench. When he had sat there for a while, a door suddenly opened, and a large table came in, and on the table wine and roasted meats placed themselves, and much good food besides. But everything came of itself, for no one was there to carry it. After this the chairs pushed themselves up, and no people came, until all at once he beheld fingers which handed knives and forks, and laid food on the table, but with this exception he saw nothing. As he was hungry he saw the food, he too placed himself at the table, ate with those who were eating, and enjoyed it. When he had had enough, and the others also had quite emptied their dishes, he distinctly heard all the candles being suddenly snuffed out, as if it was pitch dark. As it was now pitch dark, he felt something like a box on the ear. Then he said, "If anything of that kind comes again, I shall strike out and return." And when he had received a second box on the ear, he too struck out, and so it continued the whole night. He took nothing without returning it, but repaid everything with interest, and did not lay about him in vain. At daybreak, however, everything ceased. When the miller had got up, he wanted to look after him, and wonder if he were still alive. Then the youth said, "I have eaten my fill. I have received some boxes on my ear, but I have given some in return." The miller rejoiced, and said that the mill was now released from the spell, and wanted to give him much money as reward. But he said, "Money I will not have. I have enough of it." So he took his meal on his back, went home, and told the bailiff that he had done what he had been told to do, and would now have the reward agreed on. When the bailiff heard that, he was seriously alarmed and quite beside himself. He walked backwards and forwards in the room, and drops of perspiration ran down his forehead. Then he opened the window to get some fresh air, but before he was aware, the head servant had given him such a kick that he flew through the window out into the air, and so far away that no one ever saw him again. Then said the head servant to the bailiff's wife, "If he does not come back, thou must take the other blow." She cried, "No, no, I cannot bear it," and opened the other window, because drops of perspiration were running down her forehead. Then he gave her such a kick that she too flew out. As she was lighter, she went much higher than her husband. Her husband cried, "Do come to me." But she replied, "Come thou to me, I cannot come to thee." They hovered above there in the air, and could not get to each other, and wherever they are still hovering about or not, I do not know. But the young giant took up his iron bar and went on his way. The end. If any of you guys have any ideas on how to explain some of these stories, please do so in the comments, because sometimes I really don't understand the meaning behind these. Anywho, that's actually kind of long, and it's even made me kind of sleepy. So I hope you guys enjoyed those, and I hope you look forward to next week, where we will have another story time before bed. Anyhow, sweet dreams to all my kitties. Have a great week, and stay relaxed, and enjoy your fairy tales.